Welcome to another episode of Business Talk, the podcast that explores ideas shaping our world. I'm your host Deepak. I'm delighted to welcome Paul Rice, founder and former CEO of Fairtrade USA, the leading certifier of fair trade products in the US, as our esteemed guest on today's podcast episode. It's a truly an honor to have him with us, and I'm excited for what promises to be an insightful and inspiring conversations. Paul is a pioneer in the global fair trade and sustainability movements with over 40 years dedicated to fighting poverty and environmental degradation. He launched Fairtrade USA in 1998 to harness the power of business and consumers for good. Under his leadership, the organization has partnered with over 1,700 brands, generating more than $1.2 billion in financial impact for farmers and workers in 70 countries. Before founding Fairtrade USA, Paul spent over a decade working with farmers in Nicaragua, where he launched the country's first fair trade organic coffee cooperative. His work has earned him accolades including Skoll Award for Social Entrepreneurship, World Economic Forum Social Entrepreneur of the Year, and recognition from Fast Company and Ethical Corporation. A frequent speaker on conscious capitalism and sustainable sourcing, Paul is widely regarded as a visionary leader in ethical business. In this episode, Paul Rice shares valuable insights from his national bestseller book, Every Purchase Matters: How Fair Trade Farmers, Companies, and Consumers Are Changing the World. So, without further delay, let's welcome Paul Rice to the podcast. Paul, it's an honor and privilege to have you join us today.
Deepak, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be in conversation with you today.
Thank you. Paul, you have said that every purchase matters. Can you walk us through how that simple idea became a movement that reshaped business industries and empowered millions of farmers and workers around the world?
Well, I love that question. I think consumers today are increasingly aware that the things that we buy have an impact on the world. We're learning more and more about the impact of products on our own health, and we see the rise of purchasing of organic products as a response to consumers becoming aware that a lot of food has toxic chemicals and pesticides in the production. We see a growing awareness around the social side of sustainability as well, and an awareness that there is child labor in agricultural production in many parts of the world. There's also trafficked labor and hard working conditions, hard living conditions, and less than a living wage. Here in the United States, for example, more than 40% of the farm workers in agriculture live below the poverty line. And around the world, you see similar numbers. And so consumers are awakening to the fact that they have a choice. We have a choice. And that when we purchase a product that is grown in a sustainable manner, that's grown in a way that is good for the environment and that takes care of the workers, we can help change the world. We can improve lives and help maintain hope in communities around the world with something as simple as a cup of coffee.
Yeah. Fair trade has gone from a niche concept to something you now see in a mainstream retail stores across the US. What were some of the most pivotal moments that made that shift possible?
Hmm. Well, perhaps I'll start by just explaining fair trade and how it works, because I'm imagining that some of our listeners, some of our viewers have a notion of what fair trade is, but may not know how it works. So fair trade is a philosophy which essentially resides in the notion that trade and commerce, business, can be a force for good in the world. Fair trade is a movement. So we now work here in the United States with almost 2,000 brands. Globally, we work with over 1 million farmers and workers in 70 countries. We have 67% consumer awareness of the Fair Trade Certified label. So that's here in the United States, over 130 million adults that recognize the label. So in that sense, fair trade is a movement, a multi-stakeholder movement of companies and consumers, farmers and workers around the world. But finally, fair trade is a standard. It's a rigorous 200-point checklist of social, environmental, and labor criteria that farms and factories aspire to meet, and they get audited against their performance every year. So we have independent auditors that go onto the farms, that go into the factories, that talk to the workers, that inspect the conditions. And when a farm or a factory passes their audit, then they're officially certified for 1 year. And that allows them to sell their products in the US or anywhere around the world with that fair trade certified label. So here's an example, the fair trade certified label on Ethiopian coffee that's sold here at Trader Joe's in the United States. So from the market side, the companies agree to pay more money to those farms and factories for complying with the fair trade standard. And so in that sense, it's a way for us as consumers and companies to channel resources back to communities around the world. They use those premiums, we call it the impact premium, and it's a very small percentage of the total value. In the case of coffee, it's 20 cents per pound, but that 20 cents adds up. And that means that that farming community may be receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars every year, which they then invest in healthcare and education and clean water and gender equity and reforestation and all kinds of amazing community development projects which improve the living standard for the families and the communities there. And so in that sense, fair trade harnesses the power of the market, and it harnesses the power of consumer choice to lift farmers and workers out of poverty, to help them achieve a better living and to help them protect the environment. And so in that sense, fair trade is a standard and a certification system, not only here in the United States, but we have a sister organization in Europe called Fair Trade International, and they do similar work as us. So what I love about fair trade is that it lives in the market, right? It depends on companies and everyday consumers like you and me choosing products that make a difference. And that is a very empowering feeling for a consumer, especially in today's world where there's so much going on that concerns us all in the political sphere, with climate change, with global poverty. And I think so many individuals, so many people wonder, how can I help? What can I do as a single individual in this, in the face of these huge problems? And the reality is that we have tremendous power to support change and to improve lives with something as simple as coffee or bananas or t-shirts. And so that's why I called my book Every Purchase Matters, because truly every time you and I go to the store, we have a chance to vote with our dollars, to vote with our purchasing decisions for a better world.
Paul, you talk about the untapped promise of ethical sourcing. In your view, what's holding back the full potential of conscious consumerism today?
So ethical sourcing is a growing movement, which in some ways is bigger and broader than fair trade. I think of fair trade as being one really powerful model of a bigger phenomenon called ethical sourcing or sustainable sourcing, responsible sourcing. And that in turn sits underneath an even bigger concept called conscious capitalism or business with purpose, stakeholder capitalism. It's interesting because the July issue of Fast Company magazine came out with a whole analysis of stakeholder capitalism and asked the question, is stakeholder capitalism dead? And, my interview for that article and my point of view is that stakeholder capitalism is not dead. In fact, now more than ever, ordinary people are looking for ways to make a difference and looking for ways to support companies that are doing good in the world. So you asked me, what is keeping ethical sourcing from realizing its full potential? And I would say, number one, consumer choice. So we still have an opportunity to educate more and more consumers about their ability to support change through their purchases. In the case of fair trade, we have 67% consumer awareness here in the United States of that fair trade certified label. That means people have seen it, but they don't all know what it means. And so we have an opportunity to raise awareness about the label, but also to educate around and develop understanding of what it means and motivate the purchase. So I think number one, in terms of growing ethical sourcing and fair trade, things like it, consumer awareness, consumer education is a huge opportunity. Number two, ethical sourcing often costs a little bit more. I mean, think about it. If, Numi tea, a wonderful tea that's both organic and fair trade. This tea is from your home country, Deepak, from India. If Numi tea pays its farmers a living wage for that tea, it means that there's a slight increase in production costs. It actually isn't that much, but there's a big question: who pays for that? Who pays for sustainability? I write about this in my book. Who pays for sustainability? Does the company pay for it, or does the consumer pay for it? And so in many cases, brands have chosen to pass that extra cost of sustainability and ethical sourcing onto the end consumer. We live in a time of inflation. Many consumers are not willing to pay more or not able to pay more for their products. And so that has become a barrier. I'm actually really excited, though, to see many companies finding ways through ethical sourcing to achieve sustainable outcomes for farmers and workers and the environment without passing the cost on to the consumer. In other words, they're finding ways to create efficiencies through a more transparent supply chain, through a more direct supply chain, through fewer intermediaries, in a way that allows them to pay more to the farmer and not charge more to the consumer. And we're seeing that movement develop very quickly. I'll give you an example. We work with a wonderful tomato brand called Nature Sweet. It's the largest brand of snacking tomatoes in the United States. You might have seen their little volcano-shaped package. There's the fair trade label. And what they found when they implemented fair trade on their farms was that the workers were so happy to be there because the wages were better, because the treatment was better, because the living conditions were better, that retention went way up. In other words, the workers weren't leaving at the end of the season, right? They were staying. And NatureSweet now reports that their worker retention is 8 times higher than the industry average. They source from Mexico. So in the Mexican tomato industry, the normal rotation of labor is 8 times higher than on NatureSweet farms, where those farm workers feel like they want to stay. What does that mean in turn for NatureSweet? It means their recruitment costs of recruiting new workers, replacement workers, has gone way down. Their training costs, training new workers, has gone way down. And their labor productivity has gone through the roof because they have a more seasoned, experienced workforce. So for them, the value proposition of fair trade is not just that their workers are getting this premium, which improves the workers' lives, but then the company also has what Michael Porter at Harvard would call shared value. The company is achieving value through this more sustainable supply chain. And so NatureSweet is able to convert 100% of their tomatoes to fair trade, and they're not charging the consumer more. I'm very excited about this phenomenon. I think, of the almost 2,000 brands that we work with, there's a small but growing group of brands that are kind of pioneering this new chapter where they can pay the farmers more and not charge the consumers more. So, back to your question, what's holding ethical sourcing back? Cost and price is one issue, but I think we're finding a lot of brands achieving really interesting creative solutions to that. And so, I look at this, Deepak, I look at this chapter of capitalism that we're in as a 50 to 60 year transition. I started Fair Trade USA now 27 years ago. And before that, I was 10 years living in the mountains of Nicaragua in Latin America, working with farmers. I started a fair trade co-op there. I lived the fair trade experience on the ground with the farmers themselves. I saw the impact. And so I've been in the movement of ethical sourcing, if you will, for 35 years now. And so I've seen the shift both in terms of corporate behavior as well as in terms of consumer behavior. 35 years ago, companies didn't think they needed to have transparency in the supply chain. They didn't see supply chains as a risk. Today, every company is worried about their supply chain. And you hear this word, how do we future-proof our supply chain? COVID, it exacerbated that issue. But now, even on the other side of COVID, we see supply chain disruptions having a huge impact on companies. So I see today many companies realizing that sustainability and supply chain work go together, and that intersection is very important for ensuring value for the company. And so, if we look at the progress we've made over the last 2 or 3 decades, and then we think about where we could be in the next 20 to 30 years in terms of supply chain sustainability emerging as the new normal for business, right? I think there's a lot to be hopeful for, and not just fair trade, but ethical sourcing in general. I think there's reason to be optimistic about what's ahead.
Very insightful. In the book, you share stories from both grassroots leaders and CEOs. What are some of the most surprising or inspiring lessons you have learned from working with people across the different parts of the supply chain?
It's a great question. I'll start with the farmers.
Sure.
I think when we think about poverty in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, when we think about poverty in the global South, or even poverty in the agricultural fields of the United States, I think we often think about farmers and workers as victims, and as people who are underprivileged and who need our help, right? They're the beneficiaries of our compassion and our kindness and our help. And that's a wonderful feeling as a consumer, to feel compassion for the people who grow our coffee, who make our clothes. That's not a bad thing. And yet, I've never met excuse me. I've never met a farmer who wanted our charity. I see farmers and workers as actually being very entrepreneurial, very proud, and simply wanting a fair price for a great product, right? Wanting a fair wage for all of the hard work that they pour into the products that we consume, the food that we eat, and the clothes that we wear. And so, in that sense, one of the delightful surprises for me of this fair trade journey has been discovering the pride and the dignity of the farmers and the workers that make our products, and their desire for opportunity, but not for charity. And also a level of sophistication that I think many would find surprising around, for example, sustainable agriculture. So nowadays, I mean, we've been talking about organics and sustainable agriculture for years, right? Now the new buzzword is regenerative agriculture. And it means farming in a way that replenishes the land, right? And oh, by the way, farming in a way that sequesters carbon from the air into the soil. It's the most advanced form of ecologically sustainable agriculture that exists today, regenerative agriculture. And in my travels to the cotton farms of India, to the coffee farms of Colombia, to tea farms in Kenya, I've discovered a remarkable level of sophistication among those farmers around these techniques. They may not know the phrase regenerative agriculture, but they are practicing a model of agriculture that is sustainable not only for people but for the land. And so in that sense, my thinking has started to evolve, and I see farm workers and farmers around the world, again, not as beneficiaries of our charity, but as partners, as very sophisticated, intelligent, and motivated partners in a common quest to save the planet. It's very encouraging. It's very uplifting to feel like you and I, as consumers, are in partnership with those that live close to the land and who have the most access to preserving the land and to farming in an environmentally sustainable way. I also am very surprised and pleased. Excuse me. I'm also very surprised and pleased by the enthusiasm of the corporate community for models of business that generate social and environmental good around the world and also create value for the company. I see an evolution in the mentality from indifference to international supply chain and sourcing issues to a growing wave of interest and understanding in the importance of sourcing for the success of the company and for the world. And so, I think in the past, business leaders often had a trade-off mentality. They thought they could be sustainable or they could maximize profits, but they couldn't do both. Right? That's the way business schools trained us back in the day, right? Shareholder primacy. Your job as CEO is to create returns for shareholders. And sustainability, corporate responsibility, that was just kind of like a nice to have, something you did kind of on the side of your core business. And what I see happening now is a real shift in mentality. Not everyone yet, but my observation is that between 30 and 50% of business leaders today understand that sustainability can actually drive the success of the company. That you can do well by doing good in the world. And that's very exciting to me. It feels like a grand experiment, if you will, in capitalism, where especially this next generation of business leaders is tackling the opportunity to experiment, to be innovative in a way that brings sustainability into the heart of the business and makes business a force for good.
Fair trade is often seen as a moral imperative, but you also argue it's a good for business. Can you elaborate on how sustainability and profitability can go hand in hand?
Yeah, so the example of Nature Suite that I gave a minute ago is a great example of how, by investing in their workers, Nature Suite got a better outcome for the company in terms of productivity and worker retention. And so as a result, they were able to maintain consumer prices but pay their workers more. That's a great example of how sustainability and profitability are going together. I see there being two areas of value creation in sustainability and ethical sourcing and in fair trade. Value creation for the company. Number one is supply chain security, supply chain reliability, like the Nature Suite example, right, where by paying workers more, they got better engagement, better retention, better productivity, right? And so in general, I would say fair trade, ethical sourcing, sustainability have a supply chain impact that's very positive for the company and that kind of pays for itself, if you will. The other way that I see sustainability and ethical sourcing creating value for the firm is on the brand side, on the consumer side, right? We know that millennial consumers and Gen Z consumers index very high in terms of their expectations of companies and how companies will perform from a social and environmental perspective. I mean, put quite simply, Gen Z and millennials will not buy from companies that are polluting the land and contributing to climate change and exploiting workers. And they're very sensitive to those issues. They also have a great nose for authenticity and for bullshit. And so it is clear that there's a huge opportunity, a consumer opportunity for companies to bring sustainability into their business and to essentially wrap their brand with the attributes of social and environmental sustainability. Now, of course, the product has to deliver in terms of the core attributes, right? Like this fair trade coffee from Ethiopia, if it tastes bad, no one's going to buy it, even though it's fair trade. So I'm not saying that sustainability is the most important criteria for all consumers. It isn't, right? Quality, availability, price still matter. But then if you can add fair trade or organics or non-GMO or some other sustainability attribute to the product, that becomes what in my book, I interviewed the founder of Honest Tea, Seth Goldman. He said, sustainability becomes the tiebreaker. So if the product performs, sustainability can be the tiebreaker that really brings the consumer in. And so I see, in this next chapter, as Gen Z consumers come of age, I see companies gravitating, not just small mission-driven brands, but mainstream brands and mainstream retailers gravitating towards sustainable products because they don't want to lose that market opportunity. They want to be able to tap into that growing, what you might call conscious consumer or responsible shopper that is very demanding in terms of sustainability, may or may not be willing to pay a little bit more, but if they are, that means more profitability still. So those are kind of the two areas, supply chain and brand and consumer, where I see real opportunities for companies to use sustainability to create value for the firm and for the world.
The book makes a strong case for conscious capitalism. How would you define that term, and what does it ask of today's consumer, companies, and investors?
So conscious capitalism or stakeholder capitalism, business with purpose. There are many ways to describe this phenomenon, but I think we would all agree when we look at it, when we look at the world, that companies are increasingly bringing sustainability and responsibility into their businesses. And they're doing it in a way that creates value for the world. It creates social value for farmers and workers and communities, creates environmental value in terms of reduced energy consumption, reduced packaging and waste, reduced impact on climate, and financial value for the company itself. John Elkington is one of the godfathers, if you will, the pioneers of this way of thinking. John Elkington wrote a book years ago called Triple Bottom Line Thinking. And that's what he was talking about: financial bottom line, social bottom line, and environmental bottom line. And he brought this notion that we need to start measuring all three in order to understand the impact of the firm on the world. And this is, he was a precursor to this conscious capitalism movement, which, as I said before, I think is now probably a third of all companies are starting, maybe half of all companies are starting down this path. It's a process, right? It's not a destination. It's not a click of a light switch. There's a process, and the bigger the company, the longer it takes. I work very closely with Walmart. Walmart is doing great work in terms of sustainability, but it's a huge company, and it takes time to change the practices of a company that large. And so that's why I see conscious capitalism as a journey and a chapter that we're just beginning, where companies are bringing triple bottom line thinking into their decisions and looking for ways to create value and to measure value, not only from a financial perspective, but from a social and environmental perspective. And they're doing it not because they're virtuous. Companies in general are not, kind of moving in the direction of conscious capitalism because they're virtuous, but because they see enlightened self-interest in this transition. They understand that if we destroy communities and destroy the environment, there will be no more opportunity for making profits in the future. It's pretty simple. You need to strengthen your supply chain. You need to strengthen your brand in order to be a resilient and successful company in the future. And so out of enlightened self-interest, I see companies moving in the direction of sustainability and conscious capitalism. And consumers are, in some cases, demanding it, in other cases, simply rewarding it. So a company moves in the direction of sustainability. I've got a chocolate bar here, private label from Walmart, and it's fair trade. It's also got a climate friendly badge on it. This is a Walmart product, and it's selling really well. And Walmart has now committed to doing more. So in that sense, consumers are rewarding companies that are offering those kinds of impact products, sustainable products. And that in turn provides an incentive for companies to do more, to expand the offering, to make more choice available. So again, it's a process, but it's a process that consumers play a big role in, and also investors. And you mentioned investors, and we see that. We see investors increasingly looking for the higher returns that companies that are investing in sustainability are making. There's a lot of data now that sustainable products are growing at a much more rapid rate than product categories as a whole. For example, fair trade apparel last year grew by 25%. The apparel industry in the United States grew by 3%. Fair trade produce, so fresh fruits and vegetables in the United States, last year, fair trade produce grew by 24%. The produce industry grew by 2%. So you see outpaced results in the ethical sourcing movement and among sustainable products. And that is providing the incentive to companies to consume and to investors to grow those aspects of their business.
Paul, can you share an example of a fair trade partnership that significantly transformed a community and what ripple effect it had beyond just economics?
So I'll give you an example from a coffee company that we work with, Nespresso, which is owned by Nestle, one of the largest CPG companies in the world. And we developed a partnership with Nespresso several years ago in Colombia with small coffee farmers. We're working today with 15,000 small coffee farmers in southern Colombia. When I say small coffee farmers, I'm talking about farmers with, on average, 2 hectares of land. That's about 4 acres of land. So, small family operations. And Historically, those families had access to drinking water in their villages and in their homes, right? So there was a faucet that you could turn and water would come out of it, right? They didn't have to go to like a village well, which is the case in other communities that we work with in other countries. So they had access to running water in their homes. But here's the catch: 96% of those households were drinking contaminated drinking water. The water came out, but it was contaminated by pollutants upstream, often by cattle ranches that were on the hillsides where the water was being brought by gravity. So, as part of the fair trade program, every year the community gets together and discusses what their greatest needs are. It's called a participatory needs assessment. And we have trainers that facilitate the conversation, and the community has to dialogue and talk about what are their biggest problems. Is it education and keeping our kids in school? Is it healthcare? Is it reforestation? Is it water? What are the issues? And then they actually rank and vote on what to spend the fair trade premium on. So in these communities in Colombia that were selling their coffee to Nespresso and getting 20 cents a pound back as a premium, they had a fund, hundreds of thousands of dollars in this fund that they could choose how to spend. And this is part of the fair trade model, that the community decides. And they voted overwhelmingly to invest their fair trade premium in cleaning up the water supply. So they hired a company. The company came in and helped set up filtration systems, very simple technology at the village level. So the water coming down from the mountainside would go through the filtration systems. They cleaned up the water supply for now, as of today, more than 65,000 people. And of course, when you clean up the water, your health indicators immediately go up. I mean, the number one cause of death under the age of 5 in much of the developing world is gastrointestinal disease, which is usually caused by dirty drinking water. So you clean up the water, you save lives. It's that simple. And so these communities invested their fair trade premium in clean water. And you can imagine the gratitude and the loyalty to, their buyer, to Nespresso, that they feel because of this partnership and because of this impact. And so what that means is these farmers are doing their very best to produce the highest quality and to deliver on time and to be a great partner to Nespresso, so that it is truly a win-win. Nespresso gets great coffee beans that are reliably delivered, and the community gets this premium that is able to invest in truly transformative community investments like clean drinking water. And I was visiting this project last year and talking with many of the farmers, and what I observed was not just the material and health impact of this project. What I observed was such a strong sense of pride, Deepak. Such a strong sense of pride and dignity and self-confidence, because the water project was not a gift from the government. It was not a gift from the World Bank or some international agency. This was a project that was made possible thanks to the hard work and the great product that these farmers produce. And so that, the sense of pride and of self-reliance came from feeling like they had solved their own problem. No one had come in to solve their problems for them. The community had solved their own problem through this partnership. And that's what I love, because at the end of the day, empowering communities to solve their own problems is at the heart of the fair trade model. Just as empowering consumers to change the world by buying these products is also very much a part of our model as well. Empowerment.
Paul, my last question. Looking ahead, what gives you hope that conscious consumerism and ethical sourcing will continue to grow? And what role do you see Fair Trade USA playing in that future?
It's clear to me that consumers are increasingly reading the label. At the store, we look at a product and we look at where it comes from. We look to see if it's healthy. Awareness around health and wellness is growing. And so nutritional value and reading the label to understand if a product is healthy is growing dramatically. And alongside that, reading the label, reading the package to understand if a product is sustainable and if it's helping the world is also growing dramatically. And so I see a macro trend here, especially as millennial consumers and Gen Z consumers come of age. I see a macro trend of consumers educating themselves about the impact of their purchasing decisions and realizing that every purchase matters, right? That every time we buy something, we have an opportunity to buy something that's healthy for ourselves and healthy for the planet. In some ways, my friend John Mackey, who founded Whole Foods and was CEO of Whole Foods for 42 years, he frames it this way. He says, our understanding of quality is evolving. We used to think about quality as the flavor. Then we started to understand that quality was also the nutritional value. And now, as consumers, we're increasingly understanding that quality also refers to the quality of life of the farmer, the quality of impact on the environment. And so it's a more holistic understanding of what is quality. What are we getting when we buy a product? And I love that framing. And I agree that I think consumers are increasingly looking for higher quality products in this more holistic sense. And so I think the shift is inevitable as consumers increasingly shop for higher quality products, more sustainable products. And as companies seek to meet that with a higher quality sustainable product that is not more expensive. And I think that's the interesting phase that we're in, where companies are experimenting and innovating and finding ways, right, to deliver high quality sustainable products and not charge the consumer more. So making it accessible for the general population, for everyday consumers. So I see that as the wave of the future, and I think technology is on our side in that regard, in the sense that it is easier now and will become increasingly easier for brands to tell the story of the origin of their products, for brands to tell the story of the impact of their products. So imagine a day in the not so distant future when you see a fair trade label on a package and then you turn it over and you have a QR code that takes you to the village where your coffee was grown, or your tomatoes, or your bananas. Imagine being able to connect in a much more visual and intimate way with the farmers and the workers that grew your food and that made your clothes. Imagine being able to see the impact of your purchase, to learn about the children that are now able to stay in school longer, to learn about clean water projects and healthcare projects, to learn about sustainable agriculture and reforestation. Imagine being able to, as a consumer, to really truly see and understand and feel the impact of every purchase by seeing that community through a QR code. That technology exists. We don't have to invent the technology, right? And the supply chain traceability is increasingly there. So I see in the next few years more and more brands leaning into technology as a way to make the supply chain completely transparent to the consumer and to do a much better job of storytelling that will fuel the growth of the conscious consumer movement. It makes me not only hopeful, but very optimistic about our future.
Listeners, that brings us to the end of today's episode. A heartfelt thanks to Paul Rice for joining us and sharing his remarkable journey and insights on ethical sourcing, conscious capitalism, and global fair trade movement. His work is a powerful reminder that every purchase truly does matter. Thanks for tuning in to Business Talk, and big thank you to Paul for joining us and sharing his inspiring journey. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for joining with us.
Thank you, Deepak. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.